This is Eyes on the Asphalt, a surrealist fiction and autofiction podcast centered around the feeling of traveling alone, and is written and produced by me, Smith-Sweetser. You can find Eyes on the Asphalt on Twitter and Instagram at EyesOTAsphalt, as well as supported on Patreon. Like most things, the order in which you listen to this podcast does not matter, and in this episode, we travel with Marcus and Georgia through the failings of traction control. Marcus had begun to avoid weather reports when the blackbirds began to collect on the phone lines like gulls, and ignored them entirely when the snow geese began to streak south, perpendicular to the horsetails littering the night sky as he took out the recycling. There had been a fair number of frosts, and the wind whistled through the seams of the old windows in the house, but he was still hoping winter would never come. The entire house was creaking from the cold as he went downstairs, and the light coming in from outside was blindingly white, and when his eyes refocused, he could see the 8 inches that had fallen overnight. He swore under his breath. His scraper had broken in February, and the sticky note he had left on the door reminding him to buy a new one had fallen off by June. It was probably still in the house, swept under an unsuspecting piece of furniture. Somewhere in the night, the power must have gone out because the clock in the stove was blinking and the timer he had set in the coffee maker had never started. He texted Georgia. "I'll DD if you pick me up coffee." She responded with the cheers emoji. He opened the fridge he knew only had condiments in it and sighed before closing it again. He dug the heavy coat out of the closet by the front door before heading outside. The wind was bitter again, and he almost slipped down the front steps. His sleeves were cold and heavy as he got into his car from having to wipe away all the snow. Intelligent Graphics smelled like it had gotten its carpets cleaned, and Marcus kicked the snow off of his shoes. Georgia peered over her monitor at Marcus before conspicuously glancing at the digital clock on the wall. "You're so late, your coffee is cold." "Does that mean I don't have to drive you tonight?" Georgia laughed and rolled her eyes before returning to her work. Marcus wiggled his mouse and adjusted his glasses as the monitor booted up. He put on his headphones and tried not to focus on the inevitable tendinitis developing in his hands. He had finished half the cup of coffee before Georgia came up behind him and kicked his chair for lunch. "Look at you, busy bee. Trying for a raise?" "Why? Are you trying to ride on my coattails?" Georgia smirked. "Obviously." Marcus saved the project he was working on and stretched. "How's the energy tribulation going?" "Oh, you know, still running in circles about what shade of green looks the most sustainable versus the one that actually looks good. We're back to using triangles again." "Hey, at least you're getting paid by the hour." Diverting the conversation, "Are you ever going to get winter boots?" She kicked the walls of his Converse, waves of dried salt marching up the faded canvas like high tide lines. They had just dried out before heading back outside. "It's not the solstice yet," he replied matter-of-factly. "Can't wear winter boots if it's not winter." Stupid. She grinned and wrapped an arm around him, snow squeaking under their feet the rest of the way to the deli. There were some places that looked messy at first and then became charming the more you got to know them, but Tio's Delicatessen was not one of them. In the years he and Georgia had patronized it, the grimy linoleum and flickering fluorescent light had become no more charming, and the food did not get better with each visit. Instead, the two ate there because it was cheap, and because it had indoor seating. It didn't matter that the vinyl covers of the chairs groaned when they were sat upon. "Oh yeah," said Georgia, through a mouthful of chicken parm. "I met someone last night." "Oh?" "Yeah, she's a real firecracker, wicked sense of humor. Refuses to call me anything but Navy." Marcus bit into his sub and gave her a puzzled look. She punctuated with her hands, forcing the connection. "You know. Georgia. Oranges." "Huh, naval, got it. She sounds perfect for you. Well, you'll get to meet her tonight." She wiped the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. "How are things with you and Ben? You haven't talked about him in a while." Marcus shrugged. "We argue if we see each other more than 3 times a week. And he doesn't do the dishes." "That sucks. I'm sorry." He shrugged again. Both Marcus and Georgia left work an hour early under the guise of beating the insanity of first snow rush. Most of the office had cleared out anyways, and Marcus remembered that the plants on his windowsill still hadn't gotten watered. He needed some time home alone before picking Georgia up for Friday pub crawl anyways. No longer bleary from sleep and morning sunlight, it finally dawned on him that winter was here, and then it would sink its teeth into the region for nearly half a year. Driving through the fields back home, the roads had a healthy layer of slush on them, and he took it slow. Despite the darkness and the driving snow, the hills extended for many times longer than they usually did, vestigial light from the city bouncing off the clouds and onto the snow, and back again, giving the whole world a dreamy pink glow. He remembered being 7, so drenched in fever that there was nothing else to do but lay in the snow like the entire world was wrapped in a thick fleece blanket. The snow melted around him in the shape of his body, and, slowly, he stopped shivering, and all he could hear was the sound of snow falling onto his steaming skin. Marcus gave himself a moment to fall back into a bad habit of closing his eyes on the next stretch of straight road. hearing nothing but the music and feeling nothing but the soft hush of air on his face from the vents of the dashboard and the low vibrations traveling up the steering column through his hands. He could feel the cold seeping in from the joint in the window, whistling as it caught and eddied in manufactured imperfection. When he opened his eyes again, he had only moderately drifted, but there was a set of headlights directly in his path. He yelped, pulling the steering wheel in panic. He felt the brakes shuddering, desperate to find traction, and then he was weightless, drifting from the road, head swiveling to see the lights he had invited in his inattention. The Civic fishtailed, and in the pivot, neither light disappeared behind the body of the car because there was no body to hide behind. They were free-floating, glowing as brightly as anything. The ground beneath them was carved out in perfect dry circles, and the ice around it glimmered in perfect coruscation. His eyes jerked away as the car slammed into the snowbank, and when he looked back, the pair of lights were gone, and the road was empty again. He shivered and looked back to the fields, unable to find comfort in the low light and silence. When he labored back to the road, the melted circles were still bored into the slush, but there were no signs of where they could have gone but away. If you are familiar with the strange feeling that comes with driving alone, please take some time to rate and subscribe to Eyes on the Asphalt on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you liked what you heard, please share your experience on social media, and consider becoming a patron on Patreon for exclusive stickers and t-shirts, as well as an exclusive Discord where you can communicate with me and other friends of the show. And if you're listening to this with an empty passenger seat, remember to keep your eyes on the asphalt. This is Red, signing off.